Today we get to interview the Director General of the RCMP's National Cybercrime Coordination Unit, Mr. Lynam. He has many years of experience dealing with security and intelligence issues for the Canadian government and law enforcement agencies. We hope to learn about the RCMP's approach to ransomware and discuss some of the issues around it. Mr. Lynam, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to the Two Old Guys Talking podcast. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here today.
We hear a lot about cybercrime and more about ransomware. How big a problem is this in Canada?
It is a challenge not only affecting Canadians, Canadian businesses and organizations. It's a global problem. There's not really a country out there that's not being impacted by this.
In addition to corporations, government agencies, hospitals, and just about anybody with a server is subject to these sort of attacks. Would that be correct?
Yes, that is correct. There's no real one sector that is immune to this. It's affecting both private businesses, other organizations, non-governmental organizations, charities, unfortunately, are being attacked, and government services as well. Municipalities, in the news, the last few years, there's been Canadian municipalities who've been subject of ransomware attacks. Internationally, there's been a lot of news recently about the major ransomware attack that happened to the health service in Ireland that caused some pretty significant impacts. Statistics Canada actually did a survey in 2019 of businesses in relation to cybersecurity, and their data found that only 12% of businesses reported a cyber incident to police. But from my unit's perspective, the National Cybercrime Coordination Unit, we've been operational since 2020, April 2020. And since that time, we've received over 1,600 requests from our law enforcement partners to work with them on cybercrime incidents. And about a third of those have been ransomware related. So we know it is impacting Canadian organizations and businesses on a regular basis.
So I think it might have been in the 70s or the 80s, there was like a rash of people getting their cars stolen, and the police couldn't keep up to it, and the solution was to make it basically illegal to leave your keys in your car. And so, of those cases that you've got, how realistic is it that you're ever going to track down and bring somebody to any level of justice, or is the solution going to be one where kind of like it's a pandemic, where if you want to inoculate yourself, that's the way that you're going to make this an old crime, is just by industry getting caught up to the fact that this is just a new reality?
Well, I think it's both of those things. I think the prevention, a key pillar of policing is prevention, right? And that's particularly relevant in the cybersecurity sphere. So the more that individual Canadians or businesses can do, or other organizations can do to protect themselves, to have the right cybersecurity measures in place, up front to be able to stop a ransomware or another type of cybercrime from happening, absolutely that. At the same time, law enforcement has a role to go and find cyber criminals that are behind these. And what it starts with is when that attack does happen, that the victims contact police, right? We can work with them in a very collaborative, discreet manner that respects their, them as a victim, to get some of that key information that can either lead to investigation starting or feed into a larger investigation that's multinational in nature, where with the right level of cooperation and also involving the private sector, there's a lot of really good private sector companies that work with law enforcement on this, that we can identify who's behind this, and then either arrest them or take other means to take their infrastructure offline. And there have been multiple cases of that happening.
So one of the impressions that I get from the news media about these hacker groups that are performing ransomware is the impression I get is that they're actually a very well organized, structured groups. Do we know much about that? Like,
how big does one have to be, say, to pull off a colonial pipeline hack?
Right. Interesting. There's now we're gaining more information and knowledge about the groups, and there are a couple different types. For example, there are what I would say very sort of tight knit groups that are very well organized that have certain skill sets that can engage in higher end or type ransomware attacks. But then unfortunately, there are these looser groups of affiliates, or some people have one part of the problem that makes it harder to find them. So for example, there's now what we refer to as ransomware as a service. So you don't need to have a whole organization built that does the whole development, marketing, execution, collection of the money. You can rent that service and have a lot less technical sophistication to launch your ransomware attack at someone. So it's a little bit of mirroring in what's happening in the economy of like outsourcing, gig economy type stuff, and it's presenting another challenge for law enforcement.
What's the breach tactic? Like how does when they're strategizing this from beginning to end? What's the most common and popular way for them to breach a corporation so that their ransomware gets planted?
There's multiple avenues. I mean, sometimes they will exploit a vulnerability that exists in software or a service that they use. And sometimes it's referred to as 0 days that they're not known until they're known.
Right.
Or the other is they will use a method of getting an employee to click on an email link or attachment that then downloads the malware into that company or network. That then it unfolds in a couple of ways. One, often we're seeing now is the cyber criminal. They'll spend some time to do some reconnaissance to figure out in the company, what are the most important files to this company, what's the most sensitive data, extract that first, and then at some point they'll press the button on the let's encrypt their system and start the ransom part. But so there's no one way they'll get into a company, and that's why it's really important, again, all those cybersecurity measures, from training employees to not click on links or email messages they don't recognize or what have you. Everyone's got a role in the prevention side, and so.
Is it all about encryption? Is that basically what ransomware boils down to, encrypting an organization's data so that they need the key to unlock it and get it back?
So traditionally, that in essence, that's how ransomware started. As you say, malware is implanted on a system. When the cyber criminal executes that, it locks down some of that company's data or their system in general. A ransom note is put on a screen, says, hey, don't try and reboot your system or what have you. If you don't contact us to arrange payment within the next whatever hours, your data's gone forever. But what we're seeing now, and that still exists and is often how things are executed, but we're seeing now we call double extortion or even triple extortion is when I mentioned they've already extracted a bunch of the data. So even after a company pays for their decryption keys and they get their system, the bad guys have your data, and they will come back to you and say, hey, we stole your data. If you don't pay us more money, we're going to put it on the dark web. We're going to reveal sensitive information. And so these extortions happen, ongoing. And there's even a new level where, again, they've extracted enough data that they know who the clients or the suppliers of that victim are, and they will contact that client and say, hey, we got this data by breaching your supplier, and if you don't pay us, we're going to reveal this data that you and your supplier had together. So criminal organizations very adept at modifying and finding the best way to receive payment.
This is an area I might have misunderstood then. My impression was the data would still be, let's say, on my computer. It's just encrypted. I can't get at it. But from what you're saying, that may be the case, but they have pulled that data as well they can unencrypt it and use it. Is that an example of two ways of doing it, or which is the more common there?
I wouldn't be able to say which is more common, but it is a common tactic. The last thing that the cyber criminal does is execute the malware to encrypt the system. They've already extracted key pieces of information that leads to others. I mean, what I would stress here again, this is why the prevention aspect is really important, why reporting to police when it happens. I mean, we've had cases where, we've been able to find leaked data on the dark web and reach back to a company and say, did you know this? And, but they hadn't reported to police in the first place.
They knew. Would that not eventually backfire? I mean, if people just think, okay, I get nicked here and I pay, I get my data, I move on. But if it becomes common knowledge that, no, that's not the way it works. You'll pay and you'll pay and you'll pay. Well, that would make more people turn to you and not pay, would it not?
Well, it's hard to really get in the mindset of a company, right in the middle of that first ransomware attack. I've talked to some CEOs and, some others who just happened afterwards to convey to me it was the worst day of their careers. Things are moving so fast. Their whole company literally could be in jeopardy of ceasing to exist at that point. There's a lot going on, but what I would say is, the RCMP does not recommend that companies pay for a couple of reasons. One is there's no guarantee that you're going to get the data back. Two, the decryption tool might not work or might not work properly. So the other aspects is that double extortion I talked about, and then even from an ethical perspective, companies, on one hand I can sympathize that they're trying to get the business back online, but they are paying money to a cyber criminal organization, which is helping them better improve their techniques to victimize more people and fueling that cycle. These are criminal organizations. Where is this money going? Is it linked to human trafficking, sex trafficking, narcotics, arms dealing at the end? And so I think it's important for businesses to really kind of consider that, build that into their incident response plan. Where are they comfortable with the money? And if it was publicly known that they pay the criminal organization, would they be comfortable with that?
I'll bet that most people are simply not aware of this double extortion, even triple extortion, thread that you've mentioned. I guess it brings up the question is, even if you pay, you've been extorted, you've been double extorted, maybe even a third time. A year from now, some other hacker group's going to try again.
Right. And again, that's why you recommend they don't pay and that they engage law enforcement right up there. These are campaigns. These aren't necessarily just one-off incidents.
How do they pay, Chris? Like it's not drag or drop a bag off at the bus station now. It's Bitcoin, is it not?
Correct. I mean, in almost all the cases, it's what we call cryptocurrency or virtual currency. Bitcoin is the one that's known the most, and it is a way that the cyber criminals can have more anonymity with how the payment happens. What it would say is there's a misperception out there that Bitcoin is untraceable, and that's not true. It can be traced. It takes some specialized skills, and it can lead the trail back to where that money is cashed out. You sometimes see in certain areas, you see a Bitcoin ATM. And so at some point, often, some part of that cyber criminal organization will try and change that money into cash or some other form of that. So they can be traced in many cases.
With regards to what companies can do to protect themselves, I thought, just thinking it through, that if a company has their data encrypted on a server, that must protect them to some extent. Are companies just not encrypting their own data with their own keys?
Encryption at data at rest or in transit is a good cybersecurity practice regardless. Any of those, along with other measures of multi-factor authentication, proper monitoring of systems and firewall, and incident response plans, all good things. I think it's each company or each organization has a certain need and how their data needs work and how they use it.
Right.
So I couldn't really comment on, you know, I think it basically comes down to each company's got to make the decision on how encryption will work or not work for them.
And a lot of companies outsource their data requirements. Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure, Oracle has theirs, and just about all the big boys have theirs. I even think most companies now, that's pretty much the way they work. They have it all outsourced. It's all in the cloud.
There are advantages to using cloud services in that, you know, the security controls and profile are built around that cloud in general, and so, you know, you rely on that service provider to have the security control. So there are advantages to that, but there have been incidents of cloud services being compromised, and so there's no magic key for any of this. I mean, really, it comes down to, you know, those preventative aspects, companies knowing what their cybersecurity needs are and what their providers, what they're doing and what their providers are doing, and then knowing, you know, their plan of what they're going to do if there is a compromise, which again I'll harp on, reporting to police to help provide that information to link to other investigations that we can go and find the bad guys. You know, a defensive approach and prevention will only get us so far.
When somebody contacts you, a company, what are the steps that you pursue, Chris? What's the first thing you tell them?
Sure, we do get contacted. We're an organization at the national level, right, the Government Canada level. So we do get companies who contact us directly. But often what will happen, and we encourage this as well, is that a company will contact their local police, because in many cases that's the person who's going to be best placed to do that initial interview and what have you. So and then that police service will work with us and relay that information. And the role of the NC3 is really to kind of really connect the dots. So if there's one, you know, and I talked about campaigns, if there's one attack happening in, you know, one city in Canada and another rural part of it, is that the role of my unit is to link these together, try and pull those pieces of evidence or suspect information together and enrich it so that we can generate investigative leads and intelligence. And ideally there's already investigation ongoing somewhere else in the world or collaboratively. That we can feed that in, and hopefully it'll lead to that. It'll help break a case. You know, to your point is, when we do engage with the victim, it's a very collaborative approach, right? It's ideally we want them to preserve some data, share the ransom note. You know, we won't necessarily give them the advice on how to recover, get their systems back up and running. That's not the law enforcement role. There's others. The Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity has some great resources for that aspect, or the company may have a managed service provider that can help them with that. But really, we want to work with them to be able to get that information that'll help understand what happened and who's behind it.
I was just looking at the amount of attacks in one year versus the other, and there are not enough police on the planet to be pursuing all of that stuff. Is it are you optimistic that there's something that you'll be able to get on top of this, or is it going to be reactive all the time?
I'll start a couple fronts. I mean, there have been successes. You know, recently in January, the RCMP was part of a multinational project investigation in relation to Emotet, which was a big enabler to initiate ransomware, and that did lead to some arrests in Ukraine, and then the takedown of the infrastructure and seizing of the domains needed to launch ransomware attacks. And then even recently in Ukraine in June, there was a group, CLOP. A lot of the ransomware, they either have a name of the group itself or the name of the malware. So there were 6 arrests in the Ukraine based, you know, following a multinational organization. Part of it is law enforcement really working together multinationally and domestically. But the other big part of this is where we need to do better, is working with the private sector. They have an understanding of what's going on in the cyber ecosphere, you know, as much or more than police do. And so we're working very hard to sort of build those bridges so the information can be shared, work collaboratively. And in some of those examples I just mentioned, private sector folks were part of those efforts to take down that infrastructure. It's really that the only way that we're going to tackle this is that private-public collaboration going forward. So it's a different way that law enforcement have to approach this than other types of crimes.
Are the ransomware groups independent, or are they government endorsed, funded, supported? Is that part of the equation?
You know, in the past there have been state organizations. The U.S. has been quite vocal about North Korea and WannaCry, and you know, but at the same time there are these criminal organizations that are, as I said, some are relatively tightly organized, but then the other challenge is these, we call it affiliates, that they freelance. And so that makes it even harder that, you know, even if a state has a very strong policy that we're not going to allow any cyber criminals in our to operate, we're going to try and crack down. If there's all these affiliates that are operating, you know, just below the radar, it's hard for any state to do that. But, you know, all countries need to do more to make sure that there's no cyber criminals operating in their boundaries. Are
you encountering domestic hacker groups engaged in ransomware, like right here in Canada?
What I would say is there are connections to Canada. There are cyber criminals in Canada. There are ongoing investigations, but this isn't just a foreign-based thing. There are cyber criminals or infrastructure here in Canada that is helping, you know, cyber criminality in general.
So I would think in Europe you are liaising with Interpol?
So in Europe, we focus on Europol. Interpol is the global organization, and Europol does have a outstanding model for police collaboration. I have a cybercrime liaison officer that we call the Joint Cybercrime Action Task Force. It's 16 countries, and they have a representative. It was pre-COVID, all sitting in the same room, being able to collaborate on these investigations, share information where they can. That does lead to these takedowns and these arrests that I talked to. I mean, that's the model that we've got to keep pushing.
And in the United States, I was a little unclear about the distinguishing responsibilities between Homeland Security and the FBI. Who would you liaise with down there?
We actually liaise with both.
Oh, okay.
So you know, and there are other agencies as well, and you know, all have their distinct role. We have different agencies in Canada that have sort of a piece of the pie, again, to stress that, you know, everyone's got to work together and you know, make it easy for Canadians to report, to give them the advice, to get systems back online. And we work very closely with the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity, which is also based in Ottawa, and we're going to occupy a floor in their building to increase our operational collaboration, and so we're really excited about that. That'll happen this fall. Hopefully, guys, I've covered what you're looking for. Really, I can't stress enough about the importance of reporting to police. Even, you know, individual Canadians, if they're a victim of a fraud or a scam, you know, contact your local police. The Canadian Fraud Center is an online reporting system, which we're building a new one to make it even easier for Canadians to report.
Well, I wasn't aware of this sort of multi-tiered attack and extortion attempts. It's, you know, that is completely surprising to me. Mr. Lynam, Chris, thank you very much for your time, and thank you to your team for setting this up. It's greatly appreciated. I know it's a fascinating topic, and our audience will, I'm sure, be very interested in it.
Okay, yeah, it was interesting for me to listen to as well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us, and if there's anything at all we can give you by way of follow-up or information, just let us know.
Thanks for listening. Check out their YouTube channel or go to www.twooldguystalking.com. See you next time.